Hi and welcome to November 2018 Patreon video. Today I'm going to be talking about the rewards and perhaps a little bit on philosophy and studying, learning anatomy, learning how to draw better from your imagination, that sort of thing. So let's start. Today was, this month was Inktober, or I should say last month was Inktober, it was October. So everything that I did was mostly in ink. There are two paintings that I'm going to share, but mostly it was all in ink. The reason is because usually on the weekends I tend to paint, but because of Inktober, I had to also do ink drawings during the weekend. So I replaced my painting to do ink drawings. So that's why. So let's begin with this. This is the newest thing that I did. This is one of the weekend drawings that I ended up replacing. Instead of painting, I did this ink wash, and I used this ink. So I ran out. Usually I have this. This is the Pelican ink that I tend to use. This is black ink. It's waterproof. I use it to dip my brush in and my quill pens in. It's great ink. I love it. I ran out of it. So I ended up buying another bottle, and I got this thing, and this thing is terrible. This thing is terrible because it's the same ink. It's the ink that I want, but look at this bottle. It's got a thing. How am I supposed to use this with my ink bottle? So how am I supposed to dip my brush in it? I can't dip my brush in it. Fortunately, I didn't throw away this little bottle, so I just, just poured this ink into here, and now this is nice. And this ink bottle is for the ink. I could dip my brush in it. This is my favorite kind of pen ink. But I ran out of it, so I looked around, and I don't know where this came from, but this is I think this is fountain pen ink that I had. I think my dad gave it to me. It's been sitting in my over here forever. I don't know. Anyway, I used this instead because I wanted to do an ink wash. Ink wash is when you use ink, but then you also dilute it to get different tones of gray. So it kind of is like a watercolor. It's kind of like watercolor, only with ink. So I used that, and I discovered that when I diluted that kind of ink, this fountain pen ink, it turned blue. So that's why, if you look at this drawing over here, the gray is actually much bluer. And you can see that I have my pencil drawing in here, and then I inked it, and I was using diluted ink, and it just it's a little bit of a blue-gray look. It's not a bad look. It just was unexpected, so I just went with it. Also, if you notice these like rough strokes, that was done using this very thick, hard brush. So I this is how I did a little, dry brush look. And for the most part, I was using this bent up, crooked brush that I tend to use for most of the inking. I don't know what it is about this bent up, crappy brush, but I really like using it to ink with. And I don't know. It's kind of bizarre that I like using it. It's because it's all beat up. It's one of those things where I had the brush in the bottle, in the water bottle, in the little water bottle too long, or when I was rinsing it out, and then it dried bent, and it kind of ruined it. But I still use it. So some of last month's figure drawings made it the month before figure drawings made it into here because I think I forgot to do it. But these things were done in using a gray brush pen, and then having another brush pen with black ink to make the lines, the more darker lines, more refined lines. And I like using brush to do gesture drawings because it's such a loose and very free tool. I don't know what it is about it, but it goes down smoothly, and for me, It's extremely hard to use at first, and then after a while you start getting used to it. And the fact that it's gray also allows me to come back in and add when I want to refine something, I still have the option of doing another layer where I get to do these kind of refined line drawings. And this model was wearing, obviously, a costume. And again, see, and it also, the gray allows me to really quickly put in fast shadows, apply the fast shadow shapes, and then I could refine some of the exterior lines very quickly if I have enough time. So I like using ink for that sort of thing. This drawing was done for the imaginative drawing video that I did. This is a slightly more refined version than the one that you saw me draw in the video. Silver patrons will actually get the PSD file of this drawing. The difference between the one that you saw me do in the video as opposed to this one is that I think I really clearly defined these white lines in here so that it's very clear that what she's doing. I also did these little highlights on the hair so that it feels like there's a little bit more to her hair than just a big black blob. But otherwise, this is essentially the drawing that you saw me do in that video. But it was really fun to do this drawing, and I like the way it turned out, even though the hair is just huge. So this drawing is a digital rough version of this drawing here that I actually did using, again, the India ink here. I still didn't have this India ink. What I ended up using was mostly brush pens, but when I needed to do this wash, I used this Rapidograph ink, and I diluted this Rapidograph ink because I didn't want that blue ink look. I didn't want it to look like it was blue, so I used this Rapidograph ink. This is what I used to refill some of my brush pens. And this drawing is a memorial or remembrance drawing of something that happened to my son, and we have it now hanging in our wall above my son's chair as he eats in our dining room, to remind us to be grateful that he's with us. There was a situation that happened to him. I'm not going to go into any details, but let me just say that he was in a situation where he was in danger, and he came out of it okay. And for that, we are extremely grateful to have him in our lives and have him be healthy and strong and safe. In order to remember that moment, and in order to be grateful and to remind my wife and I to be even more vigilant, I decided to do this drawing so that we could never forget. And it has a lot to do with our faith and our theology. And so for me, that's kind of what it is. So if you want to know a little bit more, I'll explain it a little bit more so that about the picture itself, not necessarily the situation, but the picture itself and what this is supposed to represent and what these ghosts are. So obviously this light, since I'm Catholic, this light represents God looking down like that, and I understand that things don't always turn out, even for the most innocent, in a positive way. But since it did this time around, I'm very grateful. So this light represents God looking down and watching out for my son. So my son's name is Giovanni Ignatius. Giovanni after Saint Giovanni, and Ignatius after Saint Ignatius. And there are many Saint Giovannis and there are many Saint Ignatiuses. So I had to choose a single Saint Ignatius and a single Saint Giovanni to represent all the Ignatiuses and all of the Giovannis. And as Catholics, we believe that saints, being Christian and being in heaven, being in front of God, before God, are also praying in our behalf to God, as all Christians pray for each other, because they're all part of the body of Christ. And they are even closer to God, being in heaven, being in His presence. Therefore, when they pray, it's better, because it's the prayer of the faithful avails much. So that and so I chose Saint Giovanni Bosco and Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And both of these saints I chose because Saint Giovanni Bosco was really good with kids and educated kids, and he was he taught, and he was a teacher. And Saint Ignatius also is a teacher, and he started the Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuit order. And if you know anything about the Jesuit order, they are extremely educated. They're highly educated. You can't be a Jesuit without at least having 2 master's degrees. Pope Francis is a Jesuit, and he's got a master's degree in chemistry. In any case, the Jesuits have historically been educators, but they've also been scientists and scholars. And in fact, 35 craters on the moon are named after Jesuits. If you don't believe me, just type it in. 35 Jesuits named after craters named after Jesuits on the moon, because of their contribution to science and astronomy. So highly educated, they're educators, and so that's the reason why I chose Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And then this kind of scary being is my son's guardian angel, and he's supposed to be vigilant. He's looking. It's really bizarre. It's really hard to see. But this area here is his face. This is the hood of his face looking that way. And I put a little crown here. And this drawing, these characters this whole entire piece is kind of inspired by Mike Mignola, who draws Hellboy. Because I love the way he does the blacks and stuff. And he's heavily inspired by, say, medieval iconography and Eastern iconography and things like that. So it's kind of interesting that I'm taking this kind of religious piece, and I'm using Mike Mignola's artwork as inspiration, who is inspired by religious imagery. So it kind of feeds on itself. It's kind of a weird, kind of a twisty, spirally, inspirational thing. So that's what these symbols represent. And the thing about art is that this is what it's good for. This is, for example, there are things that we hold as human beings that aren't material, that are outside of the physical. They are metaphysical, outside of the physical. Things such as truth, justice, beauty, things like that. Things that, in fact, science cannot be done without, that science itself cannot prove. For example, that truth exists is a rational philosophical conclusion, because truth in itself, for example, it's an abstract concept. It has you can't put truth in a test tube. You can't scientifically measure truth. What color is it? How many particles does it take? That sort of thing. Arguably, you can say, oh, well, truth is an idea and it just makes an electrical impulse in my brain. But what you're actually doing is just seeing an electrical impulse in your brain. That doesn't, of your brain reacting to the notion of truth. But truth in and of itself is indestructible. It has no material form. Enter art, where you can take an abstract concept such as truth, because, and again, one more thing, science is about truth. It's about discovering the truth of the material world, right? But first you must conclude that truth exists so that truth can be known, truth can be taught, and truth can be understood. If you don't have these three things, if you don't conclude these three things rationally, you can't do science, because science is all about truth. It's all about the material world and the truth of the material world. So So what art does is it can clothe these abstract notions like justice, Lady Justice with the blindfold, and liberty is another notion that has no corporeal form. So what we can do is we can clothe these abstract notions, abstract conclusions, abstract thoughts in material form as artists. We can give it clothes. We can give it some symbolism. We can have events and emotions, and we can take these emotions and clothe them. We can have these experiences and clothe them in a visual format. And that's what gives power to an image. That's what gives power and connection to art and what we do. So that's the beauty of art. That's what art does for us. And as artists, we can take that we have in us and put it down in either physical, visual form, like drawing, or in poetry, prose, or in music, or in dance. Okay, so all these things are just expressions of things that cannot be, that aren't science-based. There's more to it. There's a little bit. It's outside of the physical. It's outside of physics. It's more metaphysical. Okay. So that's kind of the notion behind this. This drawing here is a representation of something that is symbolic to us in our family, that we put on the wall so that we can connect and understand. Based on this moment, we can get, this is what happened. Bring back that fear. I needed to convey that this was a scary moment. It was a moment of darkness and of light and fear, and at the same time, this fear brought into us gratitude that we still have our son, and he's safe and he's there with us. So it's also about gratitude. So that's what this ink drawing means. And because of this drawing, I just kind of had this experience having done this Mignola type of thing. So I decided to draw an angel. And angels, if you know anything about Catholic theology, they have no body. So they are just creatures of grace. And because of that, I thought, well, if they're not human, they must be unearthly, and they're kind of alien and kind of scary if we were able to actually see one. So I wanted to make a drawing of St. Gabriel and kind of make him unearthly and kind of creepy, using that Mignola kind of a thing. So this is one of the versions I came up with. But I wasn't really happy with it because it does kind of have that unearthly look that I wanted, but it wasn't quite, because they're creatures of grace, and grace is light. And so I decided to, what if they had the inner light? What would it be if you had the inner light? And so like the face would be lit from behind, and there would just be light in there into this hood. And it wouldn't quite be like a Nazgul. It would be like it would just be inner light coming out, and then these wings, the wings would just be made out of light, and it would just break into the blackness. And again, this is all Mignola inspired, but I've also taken Eastern Orthodox iconography, and I kind of wanted to take a little bit of inspiration from that. So that's where the name came from up here. And then I like this Mignola kind of a crown that he tends to like to put on things to symbolize their extra supernatural symbolism. And then there's this is supposed to be a scepter that he's holding, because in Eastern Orthodox iconography, whenever you see an icon of St. Gabriel, he's always holding a scepter or of some sort, or some kind of thing. But the other thing is, I didn't want to make him look sanitized. I didn't want this angel to look like just a dude wearing Roman garb with wings, because it just seems kind of like a very sanitized version of an angel, which I'm under the impression that it would be quite overwhelming and scary to actually meet a different form of creature. This drawing was from last month. I just inked it, but I was very unhappy with the ink that I put in here. Some of this is extremely thick and it's out of control. I kind of lost control of the brush, but what are you going to do? That's what sketchbooks are to mess up, right? So when it comes to studying animals, trying to draw something from your imagination, one of the things that is important when drawing creatures is to understand what makes them up, whether it's the human body or animals. In this case, I wanted to familiarize myself a little bit more with animal drawing. And so last month I was studying heads and doing skulls. This month I was doing the rest of the body of a dog. So I did these really detailed versions of the skeleton, and the reason I did that was so that I could really see them. If I didn't do a copy as detailed as I did here, I would have glanced over a lot of things that only by copying it in this degree would I really appreciate and really see. That doesn't necessarily mean that I memorized it, but it forced me to look at everything, which meant that at some level I was internalizing things that I may not have done if I was just looking at it and then moving on. Then it was the real test to see if I understood what I was seeing. And so I started breaking these things down into smaller shapes, much simpler shapes. These are just kind of the graphic shapes of the skeleton. Not all the ribs, not all the bones perfectly designed. And I was just trying to see, okay, so this is the scapula, goes all the way down to mid-rib, and then if I was to draw a line all the way across, that's around the place where the pelvis bone would end, and it would be bent this way and things like that. So how would it look like from the front? And again, more of this is the shape of the rib cage. What's the shape of the legs? What are the bones doing? Here's the knee. What are the knees doing? How far below the actual rib cage are these things? Do these things line up together? And they do. This elbow here lines up with this knee here. And then I started moving the skeleton around and also reiterating my skull drawing from last month, the month before I should say. This drawing is of my sons playing video games. I was just so into the moment. I was going to draw something, but I didn't want to do my typical thing, which is draw a lady. So I decided, since my sons were there and I was enjoying watching them play video games and I was just so happy to have them in my life, I decided to try to draw them. It came out not quite what I wanted, but this is what this page is about. This page here is just kind of some rough drawings. If I needed to ink something for Inktober, I had this page to ink, and so this is what this was kind of all about, just kind of messing around and drawing typical pretty lady. More studies of the anatomy. And so just study, trying to figure all this stuff out. At this point, I really started to understand the skeleton. So I was like, okay, great. I think I got it. Let's move on. So once I moved on, it was time to do the muscles. So I had to do the exact same thing. Just draw every single muscle, go through the whole process, just really seeing what these muscles actually do, what this is all about. So I did these really in-depth kind of copies from a anatomy book that I have. And then once I did that, I did this comparative anatomy thing so I could really understand what was going on. So I understand the human anatomy really quite well. So for example, here's the deltoid, the bicep, the brachialis, and the tricep here. And then the forearm muscles. But in a dog, it's actually quite different. The deltoid is much more stretched out. The arm is all tricep. The brachialis muscle is one of the biggest muscles that you can see, and the bicep is almost non-existent. It's about this tiny, and it's like way down there. And then we've got exactly the same muscles for the forearm. So for me, the forearm was nothing. It was this upper arm with the deltoids and the triceps that were just insanely difficult. And then from the front, it looks like this huge mess. It was like, what's going on? So, and then the pecs go instead, like in a human being, the pecs go right into the armpit. But in a dog, it goes almost to the elbow. It's just like a weird thing. And it's partly because they don't have a collarbone. So their scapula comes all the way down to the rib cage, and it's actually on the side of the rib cage, the scapula. So it's the pecs have to make up for the lack of collarbone. So learning all this stuff and like figuring it out and just studying it and just making sure that I understood it and understanding the neck muscles and how the neck muscles go and how the brachialis is actually starts way the hell up here and it goes all the way down to the front of the arm. It's just like a bizarre muscle that doesn't exist in the human body. So that's what that's all about. This was actually an ink experiment that I did because I was inspired by an artist who had this really thin line quality and this kind of like really rough, sketchy stuff. And then he would just put these bold brush strokes and just make it really black. And I was like, I love that. I want to try that out. And then I tried, and this is a brush pen. This is the same brush pen that I tend to use that is a little gray. So I tried to do that with the hair, and then this is the black ink. And so that was my experiment. I don't know how successful it was. I don't think I captured the essence of what that other dude was doing. But, well, there you go. This was a time that we went to the yogurt place to give my son, the one that went through his little experience, some frozen yogurt. Just to be grateful and to be happy and to celebrate the fact that he's safe and with us. And so I tried to draw him. It didn't quite capture how cute he is, and I love him so much, and I just kind of missed a boat here. But that's what happens, you know. And then this is a thumbnail of that very drawing here. I had it in my head. I thought I understood what I was going to do, but first I needed to plan it out, make sure that it was going to work. And so here's that. And this here is from the window of the same yogurt place. This is what I was looking at from the window. And then these are drawings just doodling. I'm not very happy with these drawings. So more anatomy study, and now I'm adding the head, making sure that I understand the muscles and how everything is working. And this is still just this whole entire just section. Like this to me was the toughest thing to really memorize. So I just kept on doing it over and over and over, and writing down the actual muscles so I knew what they were. The back legs were actually much easier to understand. There's less muscles here. This is just the glutes, the gluteus maximus, gluteus minimus here, and then just typical leg muscles here. Not a big deal. It's just very, very simple. So what I did was then I took photos from the internet of dogs in action, and then I tried to look right through them and add the muscles into it wasn't a direct copy. What I was trying to do was I tried to imagine them without skin and put the muscles that I've been memorizing into place so that I could test myself to see if I understood what I was seeing. And so that's what this was all about. But the entire point was to draw this fox. So once I tested myself and felt comfortable that I understood what I was seeing from the surface, I could see through them and see the muscles. Then I started just drawing foxes. And if you notice very closely, I am still drawing in my head. I'm drawing through the skin into the muscles, and I'm emphasizing the muscles. But I am still capturing what I see from the photos. I'm just looking at it and trying to see through it so I could describe what's underneath and understand it. So when I draw it, it looks solid, it looks natural. So for example, this line here, these lines here represent the skull, the eye socket, and then these lines here represent the eye muscles that are coming in and around. So every line here is not just lines, they are representation of what's going on underneath the skin. And at the same time, I'm trying to draw the direction of the fur, the way that I see it, so that the fur also represents and emphasizes the muscles and the skull and all that stuff. So this is what all this stuff is all about. That's what separates just a copy in an informed understanding of what you're seeing and drawing. That's what separates a good drawing from a bad drawing, is that while a bad artist would just draw and not know, and so they just end up with all these kinds of blobs and stuff without seeing what it is, and they don't, and so it looks wrong because they're not understanding what they're looking at. And so here's more studies of foxes. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, one, what foxes would look like, and two, what foxes I want to use for myself. What fox, how do I want the fox that I'm going to design to look like? And at first, I really like these shapes from this fox that I drew from a photo. I thought that perhaps this is where I was going to go. This is a black fox, and it's got much stubbier looking body shapes. And I considered maybe that's what I was going to go, but in the end, I decided no. You know what? I'm going to go with what this is called a kit fox, I think. And this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use a kit fox because I like the big ears, I like the cute giant eyes and the tiny muzzle. Earlier this month, I filled this page with drawings of kit foxes from my head, having kit fox reference on my in front of me. I decided from my imagination to start designing a kit fox that's a little bit more cartoony, a little bit more that's going to fit with the comic that I'm doing. But again, notice that I am actually putting in the anatomy, my understanding of anatomy in here. When I was drawing this kit fox, I wasn't just drawing what I saw from the photo. So that's what that is. So this is one of the two actual watercolor paintings that I did. The first one being, this was done exactly on October 1st, and then this was the other one. Okay, so the interesting thing about this is that this black that I did, I don't have black in my palette, in my watercolor palette. I have no black, so I have to create the black. So anytime you ever see any black in my paintings, I made it mixing colors to make black. So I mixed this black, and this is where the black came from. And so again, this is this hair black. I have no black. I had to mix my own black. And this took me a couple of days. I was having trouble getting her skin to look natural, and I ended up adding a lot of red in here to like really make it feel a little bit more natural. So, but this was a fun one to do. So this is an Inktober. Again, this is the first Inktober postcard ever. Like this is the first ink wash postcard that I've actually done. So this is this postcard. This is the postcard, Patreon postcard that I'm going to give away. This was based on the Inktober theme, so it's still Inktober themed. This is an ink wash, and I used this ink to do the ink wash. So now that you see that it's when I dilute this ink, we actually get a neutral gray instead of a blue gray. So unlike previous postcards, this postcard was done without any preliminaries, without anything. This was out of the seat of my pants kind of ink wash painting. So what ended up happening was, as I was doing, I was just going with it and hoping that things didn't happen that would mess it up. And guess what? Things got messed up. So I was doing this area here when I over darkened it. I did this dark arm, and it was just too dark. And I was like, oh no, I gotta lighten it up, what do I do? And so what I ended up doing was I quickly put water, and when this kind of happens in watercolor, you put water in it, and then you get a paper towel, and then you soak it up, and it lightens it up, and it's kind of almost like you're erasing the paint in watercolor. Well, in theory, it should have worked with the ink. However, the problem was that this paper is not meant for drawing on. This paper lifted, like it just became mush, and it just started falling apart on me, and there was chaos, and I was so disappointed. I thought I had messed up the drawing. It dried. I took a picture of it. It's on Instagram. You're going to see the initial version. And then I took it to work the next day, and I looked at it, and I said, there has to be a way to save it. Because I kept on working on it even after I messed it up, because I said maybe later I could figure out a way to fix this. So I kept working on it. The next day I added a few more elements to the thing, and then I realized that when you mess up, it's an opportunity to be creative. It's an opportunity to see if there's something else that you can do with it. So never think that something is completely screwed up. Maybe you can do something with it. And in this case, that's what I was thinking. I was like, there must be something I can do. There must be something I can do with this mistake that I could build on and actually make it work for me. Even if it isn't my initial reaction and desire for the painting, maybe I could still make it work. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that this kind of a rough textured area of lifted paper and muddy grays kind of had this texture of a tattoo. So I thought, oh man, it kind of looks kind of like a tattoo. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give her like this spider tattoo and make it look like this tattoo is a web, and that's what I did, and it works. It looks like it's just the texture of her tattoo. It's this tattoo that she wanted to put on her arm that makes it that adds a little bit more texture to her arm, and it looks fine. You don't question it after that. You just like, oh, that's an interesting thing. She's got a tattoo there. So I'm actually happy with the way it turned out. So great. And so that's the story behind this drawing. And I'm going to give this away, as I usually do. I'm going to give this away to one of my patrons. It's not an official reward on Patreon, but I decided to choose somebody from Patreon to get this postcard for free. And every patron will get a high-res JPEG of this postcard as well. So everybody on Patreon, no matter what level you are, will get a high-res JPEG of this. But only one person gets the official hand-drawn traditional version sent to them via mail. So the winner of this version, this original piece, is Timothy John. Timothy, you have just recently joined Patreon and you were picked out of the hat, so now you get this postcard. So we're going to work out whether or not you're actually going to be able to get mail from where you are. So depending on what Tim says, I may end up having to pick another winner. Maybe, but we'll see. So I think that's it from the rewards. Hopefully you've learned a little something, and I am extremely grateful for all you patrons out there that are helping me. I will see you next time. All right, bye.